So yeah, we are going to take you on a journey to the future today. So as Wendy said, I work for MasterCard. I primarily work in what's known as Labs as a Service. So we have a privileged position within MasterCard. We get to work on the leading edge capabilities, but more importantly, we help our clients turn science fiction into science fact. So as a group of people, we span virtual reality, augmented reality, the metaverse, through to bank as a service, open banking, and beyond. But rather than talk to what we do, I thought I'd show you a video that describes much better than I can some of the things that we've been doing and some of the things that I'm privileged to get to work on and use business architecture and other elements in my day job. So let's see what you can take with this.
Let's suppose that you were able every night to dream any dream you wanted to dream. And that you could, for example, have the power within one night to dream 75 years of time. And you would naturally, as you began on this adventure of dreams, you would fulfill all your wishes. But now let's have a surprise. Let's have a dream which isn't under control. Then you would get more and more adventurous, and you would make further and further out gambles as to what you would dream. Finally, you would dream where you are now. The ultimate reality.
So you could say I get to have some fun every day. So you probably guessed this is going to be not like many talks. So we're going to be taking you on a journey to the future. I'm going to take you from how we move through the generations of payments through to what we know as the metaverse, but then ultimately, what does that mean for our role as architects in this new world? And then what is beyond that? So before we even get there, it's important to understand how we got to now. So I'm sure all of you in your industries are experiencing disruption or have been disrupted in some shape or form. That's either because infrastructure has been modernized, commerce has become digitized, but we've also had to battle probably with an increase in cybercrime. Ultimately, what's happened over the last 10 years is that we've literally gone through a digital and communication revolution, which has changed the way that we all interact and think about the way that we engage products and services. And the reality is there's been emerging technologies and approaches that have pushed us in this direction. You could argue even before the finance industry. The most prominent one in the UK, which has now become a global thing, is the emergence of open banking. So this was a big thing from a UK standpoint, particularly when we started to think about how consumers would now start to interact with their bank. And the question is, as architects, how do you design these experiences, particularly when the change has come from an unlikely source? So the origins, for those unfamiliar, came from the UK government and the regulator. Nearly every market in the world now is attempting to be involved in open banking in some shape or form. And it won't surprise you that the business architect and the broader architects are heavily involved in this space because businesses are having to rethink and redesign the way that customers are going to interact with their finances going forward. So it's more relevant than ever. And also, you know, at a very simple level, this model works by giving access to third parties on your behalf through APIs. So guess what? Those interactions need to be designed. And the capability model, and my favorite model, which I use all the time, which is a capability interaction diagram, become more important because now all of a sudden you have to understand responsibilities of data and who is actually playing what role as consumers' data moves between new processes and capabilities. That seemed like a very short period of time. It was long if you were an architect because it was very painful moving the bank into that model or any financial institution. But we moved out of it quite quickly. And we suddenly moved into the world of platforms, which again has to have us rethink how we architect. Because the simple reason being is that the businesses we're all involved in now are looking to no longer manufacture capability. They're looking to assemble it from ecosystems to accelerate the way that they deliver services. There was a great quote by the chairman of Kroger during the pandemic where he said that they were able as an organization to stay ahead or if not compete because they realized they didn't need to build it themselves anymore. So as architects, we now need to factor in how we tap into ecosystems to assemble the capability rather than build it. So again, that role of architect and the role of capabilities and accountabilities and responsibility becomes even more important in this model. And this is where life gets really interesting. So for your organizations, all of this openness starts to change the way we think about engagement. All of a sudden now your organizations can either own an entire experience. So we take the moving home journey. Who's to say your company couldn't own that whole experience and orchestrate all of the APIs and all of the services needed to own that journey like Uber? Or do you actually not want to do that? And would you rather just appear in somebody else's journey as an embedded finance experience? Which means as an architect, you have to know how that capability is going to show up, what data needs to be there, what's the regulatory constraints, all of those things. And you're combining the journey, the business architecture, the whole caboodle to understand how your organization is going to appear in an adjacent industry. So the model is changing. The way that we think about how we show up for our customers is changing and will change. But fast forward to now, we're now in this period of convergence, which is a thread that I want us to carry through this conversation, is that the power of 6G or 5G, I should say, the power of connectivity, computing power, pervasiveness of data has all unapologetically come together at the same time. Because all of these things have matured, either our ability to adopt them or the ability for them to scale. But ultimately, we now have a jigsaw that brings together all of these things. But the question is, what can we do with all these pieces now we have them? Which is where the big changes are starting to occur. And we're starting to lean towards a new reality, a mixed reality. So you saw in the video, and by the way, this is real, what we're showing you on screen. We've worked with partners who are building shopping malls of the future, where we're starting to blend in the digital and physical worlds. And you imagine now as an organization, even more than ever, you have to understand how that user is going to transverse between a physical experience and a digital experience. And how do you architect that in a new world? And what are the diagrams and what are the views? But also, what do you need to know is going to become even more important. Take it even further, take that convergence concept. I can maybe pick up an item in a virtual world. I can look at it. I'm able to launch a live video where an influencer is telling me about the product. And all of a sudden, I need to inject a payment component where I pay for it and it gets fulfilled by Shopify or someone else. So who's going to piece all that story together? Because the business person isn't going to do it. So the need for the architect to be involved, to understand those touch points, those capabilities, but all of a sudden your identity, your data, how are all those things navigating between those touch points, which were previously just a very simple omni-channel journey, is now a metaverse journey, or even a multiverse journey, which is many metaverses connected. So all of a sudden, we have to rethink how we engage and what that means.
Hey, Mike.
And just to throw, more issues in the mix, we also now get tokens and cryptocurrencies, which all of a sudden changes the way that our customers can interact transverse the internet, but also make payments. I truly believe one of the biggest things that will change are the concept of social tokens, where organizations or even individuals will become their own communities. Those experiences need to be designed. What about the regulatory constraints, the reporting and everything else? How are we going to design those interactions? And who manages what, and what security needs to be in place? This is a emerging world. It almost feels like Web 2 in the year 2000s. And I think we have a bigger role to play than ever.
Hey, Mike, sorry to interrupt, but there's a message on your screen. Could you just hide it?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah, thanks. Awesome.
Let me just get rid of it. Gone. Okay. This is a diagram that no one's going to show you. But ultimately, none of this is a surprise. Over the last 10 years, all of these disciplines or trends have been talked about as individual things. The reality is they're now all converging together, and they are giving us what we now call the metaverse. Through the combinations of open banking, computing power, real-time personal data, 5G, all the way through to interactive commerce, is giving us the basis of what the internet is going to be. And the big question is, what is the metaverse? Which is probably what you all want to know. Well, the reality is, the metaverse as a concept is not new. The reality is, it's been around for a very long time. To give an example, my team, the team I work in, have been doing virtual reality and AR for nearly 3 to 4 years. There's people in the team who've been doing it for 8 years. The reality is someone famous called it Meta, their company, and all of a sudden people started believing us. But the reality is, if you look at the market size, it's enormous. Every company in the world now has a point of view in their role in the metaverse. For example, we work heavily in Saudi, different parts of the US now, different football teams around the world, all looking to have a name or a presence in this space, to be relevant, but also rethink the way they start delivering services. So it's a big mental shift. And it's not new, as we said. The first ever metaverse was created in there.com, which went beta in 2001. Most of you are familiar probably with, if you're old enough, Second Life. And now the modern day versions of these things are the Roblox of the world, and what we now know as Decentraland and Sand and very others. But this is not new. We are also this history repeating moment. And gaming is driving a lot of that. MasterCard now has a presence in gaming. We've seen a lot of acquisitions in this space. But your segments and your customers and how you model your products are radically going to change. You no longer are designing for the customer. You're now designing for developers, gamers. Your whole outlook in terms of your revenue model is going to radically change. If you think about 82% of people attending in-game events made a purchase because of the event. And then 65% of those purchased digital goods. And if you want to take that further, platforms like OpenSea turn over around $3 billion with no physical assets whatsoever. So it's not something that's a passing phase. This is for real. There'll be digital versions of you. So, how are you going to design an avatar, which is a representation of you, but your identity is going to change as you move between worlds and potentially bring products into the real world. Some of this may sound absolute fantasy, but the reality is we are building this for clients. There are organizations looking at legal practices, new frameworks, new ways of thinking and designing are starting to emerge. How are you going to shop in the metaverse? So we've already, I'm sure all of us have been through the period of architecting chatbots, where they need to show up. But we're now taking that further, where now we're having a human representation of that conversation in the digital world. And what do those interactions need to be and how do they need to work? So here's the question why you're all here. What is the role of the multiverse architect? And what does this mean for you as architects? And how can you play a role? I've been fortunate, and I've worked with Wendy a long time, in the sense that we've always tried to push the boundaries of what we think of a business architect, and how not only the profession but the individual stays a constant and evolves. So they have a presence as we move through digital, through mobile, to extended reality now into this new world as we know to be the metaverse. So the architect of the multiverse, which I'm calling it, is because there will be many metaverses connected. In my view, this individual will sit at the intersection of the physical and digital world, shaping those capabilities and experiences that businesses need to stay relevant. So in essence, I've always believed that a good architect is multidisciplined, but also now bringing in the concept of partners and ecosystems. That toolbox at your disposal will allow you to shape the metaverse and the real world together. Never before we've needed architects to actually shape and design how data is going to be used, how users manage their identity, and ultimately how individuals and their personas going to be managed as they move between these spaces. And what does it mean for an organization to suddenly appear in this world? Because clearly, if you're a bank, the last thing you want to do is build a bank branch in the metaverse, because let's guess what, we didn't want them in the physical world. Why do we want a queue in a metaverse? So we have to rethink the way that we want to design experiences and brands and how we start to think about those. Even M&A, how do we want to think about companies we want to acquire, and how are we going to do due diligence on them, knowing that they're going to go into a space that is still forming, and none of us really know how this is going to play out. You'll be architecting different layers of the metaverse. So there's different diagrams emerging around the world. This is a really good example of one of the different layers that you're going to face into. You know, some of you on the technology side will have to start thinking about the infrastructure. Some of you are going to have to think about the interface. So we fully expect Apple to release AR glasses at some point this year, early next year, which probably will be the biggest move that we see. As we start to move to edge computing, and some of you might be in industries that are doing this already, but we also now have to start thinking about microservices and how they're going to show up in blockchain. Some of you may have to think about how we have to think about multitasking, which tasks need to show up in a VR environment, and what capabilities do we need to design? How are we going to pay people? So from a creator economy, what tools do we need to give them? How are they going to make a payment? How is that going to flow through our systems? How are we going to differentiate between a payment in the digital world and the physical world? If it's on a blockchain, how do we know that individual is who they say they are when they're off-chain? Are we going to use the mobile? Are we going to use IoT? What are we going to use? And what's the experience we're designing for? Is that a game? Is that an esport event? Is it just shopping? But ultimately, how does that flow through all the parts of the organization? From an operating model design perspective, are we going to have a different department that manages our metaverse experiences? Or do we just blend them into one, and we now need to figure out whether Mike was Mike in physical form or Mike was a virtual version of himself making that payment or having that experience? And here's the crux of it. So I always like to be a bit controversial. In my view, the customer experience is dead. We are now designing, and you could argue we have been for some time, but it never really had a name. We're designing total experiences. We are blending together different types of interactions to deliver an outcome. The reality is we have to consider the role a machine plays in a journey. We have to consider the role the customer actually plays, the employee, the developer, machine-to-machine interactions. There are so many different actors now that we need to cater for when we're designing an end-to-end value stream or a journey, and it can no longer be about the customer experience. It's whoever is receiving the end experience and all the parties involved required to deliver it, which is the outcome at the end of the day, we have to factor in and design for. You know, if you're doing a developer experience, then that implies you could be exposing your services from a monetization point of view on a developer portal. But what does that need to look like? And how does that flow through? How do you know which developer took what API? And how do you manage the curation process to make sure that the people you're onboarding into your systems are people that you want on there, and they adhere to your internal policies? So all of a sudden now, what was simply, we'll just put some APIs in the developer portal and people can use them, is now just a really bigger task, because you have to figure out how all that links together. You're going to have to focus on journeys that span the physical and digital world. And, you know, I've teased things into this talk, and this is real. So this actually isn't a make-believe diagram. There's a company that is on our program. We have a Start Path program where we have accelerators for fintech and startups. This company have created a model where I can go into the metaverse and buy a t-shirt for my avatar. I can then leave the metaverse, take my headset off or my browser. I can convert that from an NFT into a QR code. I can then find the nearest store, walk in and scan my QR code and just pick up the t-shirt I just bought in a virtual world. So guess what? We need to architect that experience. We also need to think about what else we could inject into this experience to add more value that our company may offer. So for example, if you're big in the loyalty space, could you start embedding your loyalty services into this experience? Could you bring data insights to give extra information to your customer? Could you start integrating other forms of commerce? So all of a sudden, all of those capabilities that you've got inside your organization, guess what? You can now start embedding them into these experiences. We start to really bring more value and also then take you into this digital world in some shape or form. This could be your entire journey, or actually this could just be you embedding yourself in the journey into a completely adjacent industry, which drives new revenue. So from a propositional design, from a business architecture design, you now just have a full suite of Lego bricks in your organization to play with. The question is, what's the best way to design them and what's the best way for them to show up? This allows us, when we start doing this, to create new viewpoints. So, we can build these journey maps linked to customer life cycles. So before, begin, during, and after, or in this case, interested, decide, buy, and share and use. I can then start plotting as someone moves now between the physical and the digital world, what capabilities and abilities they're going to need as they traverse a metaverse layer, a digital channel, and the physical world. So you've got so many different actors at play. You've got the avatar, which is you, but the question is, which version of you is it? If you're a doctor, is it Mike the doctor? Is it Mike the patient? Is it Mike the guy on holiday? Who is this person? Is someone helping them? Is there a metaverse assistant that needs to provide the product advice? Is someone then going to visit the virtual store at that point? Do they need to take it back to mobile? Are there sensors to dictate where I am in the physical store so I can start that conversation? And then do I go back into the metaverse and buy it? And eventually, do I share that with my friends on my social channels? So all of these experiences need to be designed, either through, and more likely through collaborative teams, but the architect should be the one that has all the insights as part of that helicopter view of the organization to piece the story together. We're going to build familiar viewpoints. So, it wouldn't be a business architecture event if I didn't show blocks and squares. But you're going to use these viewpoints, but the thing is, the things in the viewpoints are going to be different. So you can see here, data management and governance, crucial. The foundational elements of your blockchain, your tools and standards, through to your governance model, which is now going to be smart contracts. So here's the nugget. In a smart contract world, in a data sharing, your customer or your user may now be responsible for their own data. So the question is, again, how are we going to architect that flow of information, manage that consumer's consent, or in fact, we might not even know who they are because all they're presenting to us is credentials that have been authorized by a third party. So we now need to design services that allow for the acceptance of Mike, as in, I may not even know it's Mike. It may just say that I'm a certified individual who can access the service. And if you want to use my data, I'm going to govern that based on my smart contract. So again, I have to think about these things, but also the different apps that these are going to show up in. Again, it's omni-channel, but taking it to another level. And we talked about partners. So I think one of the big shifts over the last 2 to 3 years, if not a bit longer, is this realization, mainly come out of the tech giants and some of the more nimble fintechs, that you can't, and you don't have to do this on your own anymore. We've spent the last, all of us modeling capabilities for so long. A lot of the metadata that we capture is around whether these capabilities are leading edge or whether they're just a utility. Now, if you have capability gaps today when it comes to digital, there's so much opportunity to partner with people who do it better than you. Now, if what you've got is your USP, then you may choose to manufacture that capability. And guess what? You can become your own platform at that point. And you may choose to lend that to other people at a price. So, the business architect with the product team is now architecting API as a product or some form of capability to lend to other people. But in our case, when we look at this slide, we're considering who do we get our capability from? Because maybe it's just a utility that I don't want to build. I'm never going to be good at it. So where can I get it? So I can either get it from the traditional players, which is more the incumbents. Think of that bank as a service example. Or I can just go to platform and data partners. So people who will just give me those jumpstart open marketplaces. Or if I'm in the healthcare space, or I want to get in their space, can I maybe take some of their data? Or if it's a local market opportunity, who's in the market? Maybe I need to do a digital wallet, or I need to do something of the like. Big tech is always an option if I want to start merging data and bring other aspects into my organization. I may need to work with local regulators to understand on-soil requirements and various other factors that I need to consider as terms of cross-border. And system integrators, maybe we won't do the work, but as architects, we need to shape and direct the people doing the delivery. So the whole model is changing as we think about not only how we design, but also how we deploy. But I've always felt that the role of business design and business architecture is at the intersection between these things, shaping these interactions, designing these capabilities, driving us forward. And I think it's even more important than ever now as we start to think about the complexities of designing for almost multiple different interaction places and points. So as we said, all of us now become assemblers. We manufacture very little. So we work across ecosystems to start to standardize our capabilities, which can be a mixture of business and vendor. Core functionality could be provided by your vendor. The digital platform itself includes everything to run the experience, which could be vendors, or it could be us architecting and bringing all that together as one container for us. We can then start building propositions with low code, no code. So again, which capabilities do I need to bring to bear? Which ones are candidates for APIs? And ultimately, how do I turn those into products? And then how do I then identify the candidates that I'm going to expose to the outside world? Is that through a marketplace, a platform? So all of a sudden now, if the business becomes a platform business, you now have to design for all of these interactions, the onboarding capabilities. Are you going to follow an Apple model? Are you going to follow Google Play? How are you going to design the modern digital business and how it wants to appear in all these different multiple ways it can appear in a digital and mobile world or even the metaverse? So again, big things for businesses to now start to think about, which I think is why we play such a more prominent role even more today. And I mean, Wendy mentioned data, which is kind of my big nerd, if you like. Organizations are sitting on a gold mine and very little take advantage of it. We're seeing more and more organizations now looking at data as an actual product. Growth of data exchanges, sharing of data for monetization purposes, using data to drive business performance, using data to improve product and identify gaps, using data to create new products. So as we start to capture our value streams, we start to look at our capability interactions, we also need to consider what data is passing through those interactions and whether that data is valuable or not. And is that data that actually we need to destroy, or is that data that we need to keep? Bearing in mind an interesting fact, there is only 2 zettabytes of storage in the world when it comes to data. By 2030, we will use about 20,000 zettabytes of data. So currently, there's not enough storage in the world for the amount of data we're going to be needing or using. So the value of data becomes incredibly important. But it gives us the ability to have real-time analytics, data-driven loyalty, personalization and behavior. We're seeing lots of less customer lifetime value, location market intelligence, as we say, data as a product. But there's a complexity to chuck into the mix. Over the next 5 years, we will see the emergence of digital self-sovereignty and identity. We're already starting to see this race to create country-level self-sovereignty. So the US market is leading away. EU has started the Gaia X project, which again, if you're not familiar with that, I would recommend you do have a look at it. It's where users will start to be able to access their own data in hubs. So you'd end up having verticals, data for financial services, data for health. So how we design consent and digital identity and how we use that across the physical and digital world is going to be massive. And if we start to throw in blockchain and smart contracts, as we said, we'll have that new revenue model. So as you're designing capability now, you also have to think about what you can and can't do with that data. How much of it is owned by the consumer? What insights can be derived from that data? and where is that value and where are the gaps. So when you're doing your capability analysis or your gap analysis in the business area, you're also now looking at data. If you're not, you should be, because it's incredibly valuable now to businesses, because the value is no longer what you deliver, it's actually what you add on top of what you deliver. So understanding those elements and architecting those in your capabilities or any other supporting diagrams of interaction are going to be crucial. And ultimately, if you bring all these pieces together that I've just described, the store or any form of merchant or any form of retailer or any form of your business becomes a platform. We bring all of these elements together, which allows us to create smart buildings, next generation finance, all of these individual components. And I haven't even talked about ESG. So, for most organizations, carbon footprints, the road to carbon neutral is becoming even more important. So identifying those opportunities, providing that information to your customer is massively important. And again, all of these things are a bridge between the physical and the digital world, which for me is incredibly exciting. And I think the other thing to take away as you sort of navigate all these different roles and all these different things you're going to need to think about is we're ultimately now also designing for ecosystems and open networks, which almost means a completely different perspective, because now you need to look at it in different lenses, different viewpoints. So we've already started to see in Brazil, open insurance, the PIX network for payments. We've seen, if you haven't seen this, I definitely suggest you do, ONDC in India, which is the equivalent of Amazon on steroids, which is basically an open ecosystem for commerce. You apply that with UPI in terms of the payments and data infrastructure, and all of a sudden, that is a lot of flow of opportunity and capability. The reality is, as an architect, we are sat in the middle of that mixed reality and those ecosystems. Almost all of these Lego bricks that are floating around in this space are opportunities for us to grab them and piece them together and help our organizations design what that future looks like today. I spend a lot of my time, I may not have the title of business architect anymore, but the business architecture tools are very much part of my toolkit. And I use them and I bring them out to solve some of these problems around designing some of the things that I'm describing to you today. Digital twins, humans, AI, all of these things, we can't escape the fact that the traditional models still work, but with some blending, by bringing them together and staying relevant. When you start to piece it all together, I can now start to do my heat maps in a very different way. So again, going back to our journey, now I can start to go, okay, well, maybe is there data here? Is it impacting? What about someone's identity and consent? Is that to be considered? What other capabilities do I need? Do I need partners here? What about haptics and interactions from a VR and AR perspective? And what are the technology? Many other dimensions you could apply to this. And by the way, this is just one of many viewpoints you could create, but it just shows how keeping some of the traditional elements, but blending them with other disciplines, start to give you the insights that you need from different angles and dimensions, which is why I think the role of a business architect is so powerful, because it allows us to bring these pieces together and tell that story, more importantly, that helps guide the business through the decisions that they need to make, and also be that bridge between technology. But I truly believe, and I've always been this person, for us to be successful, we're going to have to become lifelong learners. For us to have an awareness of blockchain, we have to be ahead. Our role should be to guide the business and be that trusted partner that's one step ahead. We need to be critical thinkers. We need to be able to communicate. We talk a lot about capability models, but I'm a huge believer in not showing them, because actually I truly believe there are workings out. The question is, how do we use the capability model then to provide an answer to the business and a communication that they understand? How do we collaborate as teams, and how do we create community? So Wendy does some great things around cultivating a business architecture community. How do we create that in our own businesses? How do we become embedded into agile squads? How do we become all relevant into the parts of the business? And how do we become creative in our thinking, in the way that we present, and the way that we think about the opportunities by combining capability? So it's no longer just about doing gap analysis and recommendations and creating product, but can we be innovators as well? Can we look at those capabilities and go, well, hang on, if I combine those three, maybe I could create this? And then ultimately, how do we become continuous learners? Looking at adjacent industries, keeping a track of what's happening and understanding what does that mean for us as either architects or the businesses that we sit in. It's going to become a crucial area for us to evolve. And the reason for being that way is it sets us up for the next wave of computing. I guarantee in the next 18 months, we will all have access to AR glasses. We may not be able to afford them, but we'll have access to them and they will be there. So the question is, when they are there, what does that mean for your business? What does that mean for your customers? What impact assessments are you going to make? And ultimately, how are you going to piece all these jigsaw pieces together? And you know what? The exciting part of all of this is only the beginning. So for the last 12 to 18 months, I'm a naturally curious human being, and I've gone down the rabbit hole of 6G. So if we take what we've seen, which is, designing an experience based on convergent capabilities, when we move to 6G, all of that will be brought even more to life. So these are things that we've built from the ground up using artificial intelligence, allowing for localized sensing. You'll have smart cities and smart lives. You'll have full capability industry 4.0, and all the stuff that you saw in the movies will be real. So interactive haptics, teleporting, which Microsoft are doing already, and full global coverage for mobile services. We talked about data. With so much federated data in this model, that what value you put on data is going to become incredibly important, including the economic value of it, how you sell and share it, but ultimately how you build products on top of that data. And we talked about storage of data, but we also talked about asset management. So I'm sure everybody has tried to buy an NFT. I'm sure you don't be afraid to admit it. It's difficult and painful, but it is going to get better. And eventually we'll see organizations providing you asset management capability to manage those NFTs. And even the data that you're selling to organizations, all of this will need to be created as propositions. And guess what? Someone's going to have to orchestrate those capabilities and define them. And all the other angles and elements that need to be considered. And we talked about data storage running out. So there are already examples in the world of IPFS, which is spelled wrong on this, notice that, offering the ability to store data on other people's devices or machines. So in the future, you will see cars, and we've already seen examples of this in the IEEE, where the car itself doesn't need any data other than to know how to drive. So when you go on your morning commute, I'm going to be looking for data in other people's houses to say, I'm going here, or maybe a car in front of me is going to give it to me. At the end of the journey, when I've captured new points of interest, I might get given different choices. Do I save that data because I'm doing the same trip tomorrow? So again, I'll look for someone on the network that can store my data locally. I may get the option to sell it because it's valuable to somebody because I picked up new points of interest. So someone's going to acquire that data. Or I might just destroy it because I'll just get some new data tomorrow. But all of these interactions, all of these capabilities, all of these new pieces of technology have to be architected. This, the simple of getting from A to B hasn't changed. The way I got there did. It just became a whole lot different and needs to be thought through around what needs to be reused, what partners are going to give me what, but ultimately, how is all this going to show up into the consumer's life? Big changes. I think I've got a video after this, which brings all this to life. So again, when you watch this, it's more to sort of nudge and think about what this means to your profession as we move forward.
We are hurtling towards the ultimate period of convergence. The emergence of 6G promises to blur the lines between the virtual and the real. We're on the cusp of a new connected intelligence, which will change the way we engage, pay, and work, bringing a new horizon in innovation. 6G will bring intelligence close to the end user while building bridges between physical and virtual spaces. Avatars will guide users and be on hand to be the personal companion as people navigate their way across services, creating truly immersive experiences. Payments and services will become even more personalized, thanks to rapid data analysis, which will provide a better understanding of consumer needs. Absolute position systems will be able to provide services and experiences to users regardless of their location. It will enhance the navigation of autonomous objects such as vehicles and drones, bringing orders to you and facilitating payments regardless of location, giving rise to drone delivery, asset tracking, and healthcare monitoring. Front-facing business services will be accessible from the comfort of your home, thanks to first-time holographic capabilities and teleportation. These fully connected networks will allow constant access whether on the ground or in the air. Smartphones will be replaced by fully XR services via wearables like headsets, glasses, and implants, moving us into the world of science fact and merging the physical and digital world into one. How we manage and store data will change forever. 6G networks and convergent technologies will allow a better sharing of data. For instance, cars will only store basic driving data, but will search for additional data from other cars who have taken similar trips. Fully immersive AI can also manage future journeys by pooling together vast amounts of data and making it available to the user at the click of a button. A new era of sharing and owning our own data is here. Users will be able to store their own data in fully interactive wallets managed by digital personal asset managers. These assets can be tracked and traded via XR capabilities. Users will no longer need a proof of identity, but instead will need proven and valid credentials. This will allow users to protect their identity across the physical and digital world. 6G will enable constant network access for all users, from holographic teleportation, deep-sea communication, attending concerts in the metaverse from distant locations, remote location access to vehicular communications. 6G will truly make us a globally connected planet across the digital and physical landscape. 6G will usher in a new era where everything will be sensed, connected, and intelligent. This will lay the foundation for a fully connected, distributed, and intelligent digital world, taking us forward towards the next horizon.
And the reality is, if you see all of that, and that's just to get you thinking, there's some great videos out there I recommend you watch as well from Huawei and others who are very similar thinking to ourselves, if not pushing the boundaries even more. But the reality is we're creating a mixed reality. That's where we're heading. And I think for the consumer, whoever that is, we as organizations now are giving people that 360 view across their life, connecting their health life, their utility life, communications. And if you think about your roles today, you're going to be at the intersection of this. It's almost like a sweet store where you're going to have access to all of these services. The question is, who's going to piece them together and how are they going to be brought to life, which is where I see the role of business architecture going forward. And I've always thought that way. A lot of the things that you've seen today are real. We've either built them for customers or we are building them. And organizations are starting to think about these things at board level. So there's a huge opportunity to really get involved in this space if you're not already. And I didn't want to leave you without giving some nuggets in terms of, well, how do you prepare for this? So the first thing I would do is help people identify the value in their data. You know, ultimately, what should you be storing and what not? You know, as architects, you know, even more and more than ever, you know, digital used to be just a channel, another channel. It's now digital first and only digital in the thinking, and API first as well, and any other technologies that come along beyond that. The biggest thing I notice that people don't do, and I think it's, you know, as a community of architects, we're in the ability to influence this, is treating APIs and data like products. They should be treated no differently to any product that the business launches, and they should be looking at it as a revenue generator. As architects, we need to think platforms and ecosystems, using those capabilities and decide then, working with the business and technology teams, how that business actually wants to show up in digital. What role do they want to play in that new digital world? Test and learn, you know, it's used a lot as a term, but it's so important. It's a case of not being perfect, but helping the business, giving them the guide rails, giving them the capability guide rails and the architectures to allow them to have that agility and that confidence that they can fail safely. You know, as architects, we need to design from the end. So we need to start with outcomes and problems and think about the total experiences. Be the trusted partner, asking those really awkward questions, and ultimately shaping that total experience, but not creating solutions looking for problems, starting with outcomes and working backwards. And I only wish I have for you all is what I've lived my life by, is just I'm just naturally curious. And I think becoming lifelong learners, and more importantly, turning all that knowledge that we gain into wisdom, is going to allow us to be successful in the metaverse and beyond, because there are so many things that we now have to think about. Everybody has talked about how exciting it's going to be in the digital world, but there are so many regulatory and security and governance aspects, people's identity, their data, you know, all of these things need to be thought through. And I think that's where all of us can come to the fore, because we have that experience of having that mindset of thinking of the awkward questions that no one wants to ask. And I think that puts us in a really good position to help businesses get ready for what this new world is going to be. So hopefully that hasn't freaked you out too much and has given you thought in terms of what this all might mean for you, and some of the viewpoints that you can start to create. But clearly this is just, you know, a drop in the ocean. I think for all of you and myself, this is probably the next phase of our careers, in terms of how we fit all this together. But I think it's really exciting. I truly believe that business architecture has a even more prominent role in this space than it has done in any other spaces before it.
Well, Mike, thank you so much. That was inspiring, visionary, insightful, amazing talk. Really appreciate your thought leadership and leadership. So if you are ready for some questions, we'd love to chat for a bit.
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. And everyone, feel free to share questions for Mike. You covered so much. I don't even know where to start, but I love that experiences, total experience and capabilities are still the currency. They're still the building block. And just wondering, you know, to go to your point about assembling capabilities from ecosystems versus building, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you work as an innovator and you're working with organizations that are innovative, but how do you get people thinking that way? How do you get leaders thinking that way? Because it's a bit of a different paradigm and it's a lot of change for a big organization.
Yeah, it's difficult. We're very fortunate that a lot of the organizations we work with are a bit more forward thinking, but we do, we think of ourselves as, my boss uses the term Sherpas. So our job really is to guide them. So we have the value of being the tip of the digital spear. So our role really is to not tell them the answer, but guide them through the process. It's almost, first of all, we focus on the problem rather than anything else. So we start from the problem and work backwards. So we start with the problem that the customer is starting to solve, because partners at that point are irrelevant, because I don't really know what problem you're trying to solve. So from an organizational standpoint, it's okay, what the problem is, and then how are you currently performing against that problem? So we can do like a current state assessment, a diagnostic on how that business is running, no different to how a business architect would today. The difference is, once we know the capability gap, then we can actually have the question internally to say, well, look, we could potentially help fill that gap with our products, or if actually we can't help you with that, we've got an ecosystem of partners that we can pull from that will actually fill that gap for you. So ultimately what we then deliver them is a way of accelerating the problem, but their digital transformational journey. And then longer term, we might end up helping them then think about their partner strategy if they don't have one, or how this would then fit naturally into their broader digital transformational journey. Bearing in mind that every organization is at different phases of that journey. Some will be at the strategy phase, some will be thinking about digital products and digital journey design, or some will be thinking more of the crazy stuff that I showed, which is around AI, machine learning, or different digital channels, because they're that more mature. But everything starts with the problem, and then we literally look at their capability to solve that problem based on the performance of their capability and all the other elements. And then based on that, we can then identify what needs to change and what doesn't.
How does this and I know you're involved in university a bit, so how does this type of thinking, I mean, does this change the way we educate in university and business education younger than that? What are your thoughts?
It's really funny you say that. So I'm reading an interesting book at the moment. I told you I read a lot. I'm reading Charlie Munger's Almanac at the moment. So he's the partner of Warren Buffett.
Mm-hmm.
So he uses a great quote that he said, in nearly every room that he's in, he's not the smartest person, but he can outthink everybody because he's got more mental models in his head. So his belief is the same as mine, and I can't take the credit because he's more successful than I'll ever be. But the reality is, for us to be good at what we do, we have to have many mental models. So it's almost, how can you pick the right tool from your toolbox to solve the problem? Because the old adage is, if you've only ever been taught with a hammer, every problem to you looks like a nail. So the reality is we have to have that multidiscipline approach, because not every problem is going to be a nail. And we need to think what we need to consider to address that problem. And that becomes even more important when the problems of the physical world don't really relate to the digital world, because a lot of those boundaries go away. But when we think about something really simple, let me give you a real example. So in the physical world, or in a 2D world, we just consume content. So I'll put content on the internet and I'll read it and I'll consume it. In the metaverse, I participate in content, which is completely different. So what do you do with someone who's got a disability and accessibility needs when they're in the metaverse? Because something that I do in the metaverse that I think is cool could actually generate an adverse reaction. And what does that mean from a governance standpoint and a regulatory aspect? Because that could be the same interaction that I would try to do in the 2D world, but it amplifies itself in the metaverse or that type of world. So the way, going back to your question, university, I think it really stems from, almost treating university as the start, not the end. Mm-hmm. And whether or not, you span out into multidisciplines which make a difference, or once you leave university, you accept that that's just the first step on your learning journey and it never truly ends. And you're really keeping abreast of all of the important disciplines and then figuring out how you marry those together in terms of how you want to work.
Yeah. Well said. A thread that you mentioned multiple times, maybe we could dig in a bit more, but how can the business architecture or the architecture underpin the transparency, ethics, and governance that's needed in this digital world? How can it help?
I think it's the word you use is foundation. So if you think about, like, I shouldn't say this, but I'm not really excited by the user interface of the metaverse, really. I'm more excited about how we make it work. So I think the business architects have a role to play when we think about the fabric and how things need to appear and how things appear in that presentation space. So the business architect has a role to not only identify where things need to show up, but almost having a 360-degree view on the capability that's showing up. So, if I'm showing something up in a particular moment, what's the data constraints with that? What's the regulatory moment? Who do we need to collaborate as business architects within the business to bring into that conversation? So do I need to go and speak to external legal counsel? Do I need to speak to my internal legal counsel? Do I need to speak to people in data privacy? It all comes back to asking the awkward questions that no one else will answer and ask. Because it's like, look, you want to launch that capability in the metaverse, that's great. But did you know that in this market, you can't do that because the customer's data can't leave on soil? Did you know that you can't do that because now the customer has the rights on their data and we have to pay them every time we access it? So we have to ask those awkward questions, and we want to factor in these lenses when we look at the capability. And I think the more we show value in guiding the business, the more relevant we'll become. And we won't be a standalone. I think this is the other thing to mention. I touched on it briefly in the talk, but we won't become like a standalone role. We'll be part of an agile team. So our role will be part of the agile squad, and there will be stories attached to us. And that way, then we become embedded in any change or any particular area of the business that's looking at a particular value stream or a particular focal point.
Right on. Well, maybe one last question, then we'll give you some closing words. But I like that you shared, and I think this is so interesting to watch in your journey, how your architectural thinking has underpinned what you do.
Yeah.
And I also like that you said the traditional models still work, you know, they just need some blending. So what do you think it is about your architectural thinking or experience that helps you be successful in other roles?
It's a really good question. I haven't really thought about that actually. I think deep down, I've always looked at the viewpoints in business architecture as my toolbox. So I've always looked at those as my fundamental analysis tools that I can use to articulate problems, solutions to other people. So I think that the constant throughout, as I've learned different technologies and different industries and stayed abreast of how things have moved, the constant has been that mental model, if you like, of how I think and look at the world. So business architecture has given me a way of abstracting all of the complexity and allowed me to get down to what these things really mean. Because there's so much hype around all of these things. But when you go back to first principles and you look at ultimately what are the capabilities that they provide and what they do, you're still back into that thinking mindset. And I think when I say the traditional models still work, like I still use the Mickey Mouse diagram of interactions, which I shared with you before. I still use that. I've just made it look different through the years. So the models have stayed the same. The only thing that's changed is I've blended them together sometimes with different disciplines. So I've combined service design with business architecture to give me different views altogether and heat mapping. But the outcome is still the same. I want to know how the business is performing or not. I think the only thing that's changed through the years is what I show people and what I don't. That's what's changed. So the capability model is my tool because nearly every business in the world has run without them for the last 40 years. My job is to use that model as a means of identifying gaps and then figuring out the best way to present my answer in the way that the business can understand. So whether that's in a table, whether that's using icons, but still using the terms from the capability model, but in a way where I don't have to teach the business what capabilities are. I'm just using it as a means to solve my problem. And then the question is, how can I present it in the way that people understand? So I'm using the models, but they've become more personal to me because they've become my toolbox for solving problems. I'm spending half my life now figuring out and being more creative in terms of how I sell the answer.
Outstanding. Well, we just have less than a minute left. So Mike, over to you for any just final closing words.
I would really say that we're in a really exciting space and a really exciting time to be alive. I truly believe that because I think we're in a cusp of where we are designing the new future. I'm sure we were all involved at some point in Web 2, and we saw the dot-com bubble and everybody thought it wouldn't come of anything, and now we all use Google and we all use Facebook and everything else. The beauty of where we are today is we're actually in a position where we can design this. So we can actually help our organizations figure out how they want to play and how they want to be in this space. And I think that's just an amazing opportunity. I think it's an amazing opportunity for the business architecture profession. I think it's an amazing opportunity for individuals with their careers. I think it's an amazing opportunity for businesses in terms of how they get an opportunity to jumpstart their brand and how they think. So I think I would look at what I've shown you today as, this is happening, this is real. And I would also think of this as, my God, how do I take part in this and how do I shape what I want to do? Because I think there's such an opportunity for everyone to participate, drive direction, but also reinvent, which is what we always want to do.